The bank was alive with the hum of wealth, polished marble gleaming under soft light. Sarah Thompson stood at the counter, her worn coat brushing its edge. She slid a check forward, $100,000, her hands steady with purpose. But before she could speak, the teller's voice sliced through the air. "You expect me to believe this is yours? Look at you!" Karen's words landed like a blow, heads turning, whispers spreading. Sarah's eyes widened, shock rooting her in place. Customers stared, some smirking, others glancing away. In that moment, she wasn't a woman with a dream. She was a problem to be swept aside. But what the bank didn't know was the truth tucked inside her tattered bag, a secret that would unravel their judgment. Who was this woman, and what could make a room full of strangers regret their scorn? This is a story of one day, one check, and a truth that changed everything. Sarah Thompson stood at the counter, the sting of the teller's words still hanging in the air. "You expect me to believe this is yours? Look at you." Those words weren't new to her. Judgment had followed her for years, like a shadow she couldn't shake. But today, Sarah wasn't here to prove anyone wrong. She was here for something bigger, something that made her heart beat with quiet pride. The check in her hand, $100,000, wasn't just money. It was a promise, a lifeline for people who had nothing. To understand why Sarah stood there, clutching that tattered bag, we need to step back, to see the woman behind the worn coat. Sarah was 35, though life had carved deeper lines into her face. Once, she'd been a rising star in a corporate office, her desk lined with awards, her future bright. She wore tailored suits then, her laughter easy, her dreams tied to promotions and paychecks. But the world has a way of rewriting plans. A sudden layoff stripped her of that life, leaving her with a young daughter to raise and bills that never stopped coming. Most would have crumbled, but Sarah didn't. She took what little she had and built something new, not for herself, but for others. By day, she worked odd jobs, cleaning houses, serving coffee, anything to keep food on the table. By night, she poured her soul into a dream no one knew about. Sarah had started a charity, small at first, just her and a notebook filled with ideas. She called it Haven House, a name that felt like hope. It began with handing out blankets to the homeless, then grew into something bigger, fundraising for shelters, food, second chances. Sarah didn't do it for praise. She did it because she'd known what it was to lose everything, to feel invisible. Every dollar she raised was a brick in a foundation for those society forgot. The check she held now was the fruit of months of work, countless phone calls, bake sales, and quiet pleas to donors. $100,000. Enough to open a new shelter, a place where families could rebuild. Sarah could have mailed it, could have let someone else handle it. But this was personal. She wanted to walk into the bank herself, to feel the weight of that moment, to know she'd carried it through. Her daughter Emily had hugged her that morning, her small voice full of pride. "You're doing something amazing, Mom." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind as she stepped into Oak Ridge Bank. The bank was a world apart from her life. Marble floors stretched wide, reflecting chandeliers that glowed like stars. The air smelled of leather and wealth, and the customers moved with the ease of those who never worried about money. Men in tailored suits checked their watches, women in designer coats chatted softly. To them, the bank was a routine, a place where their worth was assumed. To Sarah, it was a hurdle, a place where her faded coat and scuffed shoes marked her as an outsider before she even spoke. She felt their eyes on her, not cruel, but curious, as if she'd wandered into a private club by mistake. Sarah didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that worth wasn't in what you wore or what others thought. It was in what you did when no one was watching. Still, her hands tightened around her bag, a canvas tote patched with care. Inside was her notebook, pages filled with donor names, shelter plans, dreams inked in careful handwriting. That notebook was her anchor, a reminder of why she was here. She approached the counter, her heart steady but her stomach twisting. She knew what was coming. She'd seen that look before, the one that sized her up and found her wanting. But Sarah wasn't naive. She'd prepared for this, double-checked every document, every signature. The check was real, the charity legitimate, her purpose clear. She told herself it would be simple. Hand over the check, sign the papers, walk out knowing she'd taken one more step toward her goal. Yet as she stood there, the teller's words ringing in her ears, she felt the weight of something heavier than paperwork. This wasn't just about a deposit. It was about being seen, not as a woman in a shabby coat, but as someone who mattered. For a moment, she thought of turning back, of sparing herself the fight she knew was brewing. But then she saw Emily's face in her mind, heard the voices of the families waiting for that shelter. Sarah straightened her shoulders, her resolve hardening. She wasn't here for herself, she was here for them. And no one, not the teller, not the staring customers, was going to stop her from keeping that promise. Sarah Thompson stood at the counter of Oak Ridge Bank, the echo of the teller's words still burning in her ears. "You expect me to believe this is yours? Look at you." Her fingers tightened around the canvas bag, its patched seams a quiet rebellion against the gleaming world around her. She'd known judgment before, but this was different, sharper, meant to wound. The woman who'd spoken wasn't just any teller. She was Karen Mitchell, the bank's head teller, a gatekeeper who wore her authority like a crown. To Sarah, she was a hurdle. To Karen, Sarah was an inconvenience, a blemish on her perfectly ordered day. Karen was 40, her blonde hair pulled into a flawless bun, her suit tailored to signal importance. She moved through the bank with a practiced smile, one that warmed for men in expensive watches and cooled for anyone who didn't fit her mold. Customers called her efficient, charming even, but only if they matched her idea of worth. To Karen, Oak Ridge Bank was a stage, and she was its star, deciding who deserved her time and who didn't. Sarah, with her faded coat and scuffed shoes, didn't make the cut. It started subtly, the way cruelty often does. Sarah handed over the check, $100,000, her voice steady as she explained. "It's for my charity, Haven House, for a new shelter." She offered a folder, papers neatly organized, proof of every dollar's origin. Karen took the check, her manicured nails catching the light, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. $100,000, she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "I'm sorry, but where did you get this kind of money?" The question wasn't curious. It was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. Sarah felt the room shift. Customers glanced up from their phones, their eyes lingering on her coat, her bag, her face. A man in a suit raised an eyebrow. A woman with pearls whispered to her friend. Sarah's cheeks warmed, but she held her ground. "I've brought all the documentation," she said, sliding the folder closer. "It's all there, the donors, the charity's license, everything." Her voice was calm, practiced, but inside her heart raced. She'd prepared for questions, but not for this. Not for the way Karen's gaze stripped her bare. Karen didn't touch the folder. She held the check up, tilting it toward the light as if it were a forgery she'd caught in the act. "We've had issues with fraudulent checks," she said, her tone clipped, professional but laced with something darker. "I'll need to verify this. Thoroughly." She set the check down, her fingers brushing it like it carried a stain. Then she turned to a younger teller nearby, her voice dropping just enough to be heard. "People think they can walk in here with anything. We have standards, you know." The younger teller nodded, glancing at Sarah with a mix of pity and unease. Sarah caught the look, her stomach twisting. She wanted to speak, to say the check was real, that Haven House was real, that she was real. But Karen was already moving, her heels clicking across the marble floor, calling out to another customer. "Good to see you, Mr. Harrison. Let me take care of you right away." Her smile was bright now, her warmth reserved for a man whose suit screamed wealth. Sarah stood frozen, the check untouched on the counter. The folder she'd spent hours preparing lay ignored, its edges curling slightly in the air-conditioned chill. Around her, the bank pulsed with life, transactions flowing smoothly for others. A woman in a cashmere scarf sailed through with a deposit, no questions asked. A young man in a designer jacket laughed with another teller, his paperwork waved through with a nod. Sarah watched, her mind cataloging the differences, the ease others took for granted. Karen returned, her eyes flicking over Sarah like she was an afterthought. "I'll need more than this," she said, tapping the counter. "Identification, proof of address, anything to confirm you're who you say you are." Her words were polite, but her tone was a blade, cutting away Sarah's dignity. Sarah reached into her bag, pulling out her ID, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Here," she said softly, "everything you need." But Karen barely looked at it. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "You understand why we're careful, don't you? Not everyone belongs in a place like this." The words landed heavy, each one a stone piling onto Sarah's resolve. She felt the eyes again, more now, the whispers growing louder. Fraud. Doesn't look right. What's she doing here? The bank, with its chandeliers and marble, seemed to close in, its grandeur a wall between Sarah and her purpose. Sarah's fingers brushed her notebook inside the bag, the one with names of families she'd helped, plans for the shelters she dreamed of. She thought of Emily, her daughter, waiting at home, believing in her. She thought of the people who'd trusted her with their donations, who'd believed in Haven House because she did. Karen's words stung, but they couldn't erase that truth. Sarah lifted her eyes, meeting Karen's gaze for a moment, searching for a crack in her armor. There was none, not yet. Sarah Thompson stood at the counter of Oak Ridge Bank, her identification untouched, the check for $100,000 lying like a discarded promise. Karen Mitchell's words hung in the air, their sting sharper with every passing second. Not everyone belongs in a place like this. Sarah's heart thudded, a rhythm of hurt and defiance, but she kept her face composed, her hands steady on her patched canvas bag. She'd faced dismissal before, in grocery store lines, at job interviews, but this was different. This wasn't just about her, it was about the shelter, the families, the hope she'd carried into this gleaming fortress of wealth. Karen had moved on, her heels clicking as she greeted another customer with a smile that never reached Sarah. The bank hummed around them, a symphony of privilege. Tellers typed briskly, phones buzzed, and customers flowed through with ease, their worth unquestioned. Sarah watched it all, her eyes tracing the patterns of who was seen and who was ignored. A man in a pinstripe suit deposited a check with a nod, no scrutiny, no delay. A woman with diamond earrings laughed with a teller, her paper whisked away like a formality. Sarah's folder, its pages worn from her careful hands, lay ignored, a silent rebuke to the bank's fairness. She tried again, her voice soft but firm. I have everything you asked for. The check is valid. The charity is registered. Please just process it. Karen turned, her gaze cold, appraising Sarah like a puzzle she'd already solved. We're not done verifying, she said, her tone clipped, final. You'll need to wait. Sarah's stomach twisted, but she nodded, stepping back, her shoes scuffing faintly on the marble floor. Waiting wasn't new to her. She'd waited for buses in the rain, for landlords to fix leaks, for life to give her a break. But this wait felt heavier, laced with something cruel. Karen didn't let it rest. She leaned toward the younger teller, her voice loud enough for Sarah to hear. We get all kinds in here, don't we? Thinking they can just walk in with big numbers and expect us to believe it. The teller glanced at Sarah, her face a mix of discomfort and obedience, then nodded. Sarah's cheeks burned, the weight of eyes growing heavier. Customers nearby shifted, some pretending not to hear, others stealing glances. A man in a navy blazer muttered something to his wife, who smirked. Another woman adjusted her purse, as if Sarah's presence might taint it. Sarah moved to a corner, not by choice but because Karen gestured sharply, pointing to a spot near the wall. Stand there until we're ready, she said, her words carrying across the lobby. Sarah walked slowly, each step a battle to keep her dignity intact. The marble was cold under her feet, the chandeliers above casting light that felt more like judgment than warmth. She stood, her bag clutched to her chest, the notebook inside a lifeline to her purpose. She thought of Emily, her daughter, drawing pictures of the shelter they'd build, families smiling under a roof that didn't leak. That image held her steady, even as the whispers grew louder. Time stretched, each minute a small eternity. Sarah counted the tiles on the floor, 47, 48, anything to keep her mind from unraveling. She noticed the bank's rhythm, how it favored some and dismissed others. A young man with a thick accent approached the counter, his paperwork in hand. Karen waved him off, her voice impatient. System slow today. Come back later. He left, shoulders slumped, unnoticed by the crowd. Moments later, a couple in matching coats arrived, their deposit handled with smiles and speed. Sarah's chest tightened, the unfairness sinking deeper. It wasn't just her. It was anyone who didn't fit Karen's narrow vision of worth. Karen's attention returned, her heels announcing her approach. She stopped a few feet from Sarah, arms crossed, her face a mask of authority. I'm going to need more documentation, she said, her voice loud, performative. This check raises red flags, you understand, don't you? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Karen cut her off. And frankly, your story doesn't add up. A charity? With you? She laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet. Sarah's breath caught, her fingers digging into her bag. The room seemed to tilt, the faces around her blurring into a sea of curiosity and scorn. Sarah tried to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I've given you everything. The donors, the licenses, it's all real. Karen raised a hand, dismissing her. That's not how this works, she said. We have protocols. Her eyes flicked over Sarah's coat, her her shoes, her tired face. You should know better than to expect special treatment. The words were a whip cracking across Sarah's resolve. She felt small, exposed, a spectacle for the bank's amusement. A woman nearby whispered to her friend, loud enough to carry, "Probably stole it." Another chuckled, the sound cutting deeper than Karen's words. The tension built, a storm gathering in the polished lobby. Karen wasn't done. She turned to the security guard, a broad man stationed near the door, and nodded towards Sarah. "Keep an eye on her," she said, her voice clear, commanding. "Make sure she doesn't cause trouble." The guard moved closer, his presence looming, his hand resting on his belt. Sarah's heart pounded, a mix of fear and fury. She hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't stepped out of line, yet here she was, cornered, watched, judged for existing. The whispers grew, a chorus of doubt and disdain. "She's wasting everyone's time, shouldn't be here." Sarah's mind raced, memories flooding in, her daughter's voice, "Mom, you're a hero," the families she'd met, their gratitude, their hope. She clung to those truths, but the bank's walls seemed to press closer, its grandeur a cage. Karen stood across the room, her posture triumphant, as if she'd won something by pushing Sarah to the edge. Sarah's hands trembled, not with defeat, but with a fire she hadn't yet unleashed. Then came the moment that broke the air. Karen walked back, her eyes locked on Sarah, her voice rising for all to hear. "You know what?" she said, pausing for effect. "This bank isn't for people like you. Get your things and go. We don't have time for this nonsense." The words landed like a thunderclap, silencing the lobby. Sarah stood frozen, the insult sinking into her bones. Every eye was on her, every whisper stilled. The guard stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. The bank, with its marble and money, held its breath, waiting for Sarah to crumble. But Sarah didn't move. Her hands tightened around her bag, her notebook inside a silent vow. She thought of the shelter, the families, the life she'd built from nothing. Karen's words were heavy, but they weren't the truth. Not yet. Sarah lifted her eyes, her gaze steady, searching the room for something, anything to hold on to. The clock ticked, its sound deafening in the quiet. She wasn't done here, not by a long shot. Sarah Thompson stood in the corner of Oak Ridge Bank, the weight of Karen's words pressing down like a storm. "This bank isn't for people like you. Get your things and go." The lobby was silent, every eye fixed on her, waiting for her to break. The security guard loomed nearby, his shadow heavy, the whispers of customers a low hum of judgment. Sarah's hands gripped her tattered bag, her knuckles pale, but her face told a different story. There was no fear there, no defeat. Something deeper burned in her eyes, a fire kindled by years of pushing through loss and doubt. She took a breath, slow and steady, the kind that steadies a heart before a leap. The bank felt smaller now, its marble and chandeliers fading against the truth she carried. Sarah lifted her chin, her gaze locking onto Karen's across the room. The teller's smirk faltered, just for a moment, as Sarah spoke, her voice clear, unwavering, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You can judge my clothes, but you'll never know the lives they've helped save." The words hung in the air, simple but heavy, a promise wrapped in defiance. Customers shifted, their glances softening, some leaning forward as if hearing her for the first time. Karen blinked, caught off guard, her authority shaken by the quiet power in Sarah's tone. The guard paused, his hand dropping slightly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Sarah stood taller, her bag a shield, her notebook inside a testament to her purpose. For a moment, the bank held its breath. Sarah's words weren't loud, but they echoed, planting a seed of doubt in the room's certainty. She didn't need to shout. Her truth was enough, a spark waiting to ignite. The clock ticked on, its rhythm steady, but something had changed. Sarah wasn't just a woman in a corner anymore. She was a force, and the tide was turning. Sarah Thompson stood in the corner of Oak Ridge Bank, her words still echoing in the charged silence. "You can judge my clothes, but you'll never know the lives they've helped save." The lobby seemed to pause, the weight of her truth settling over the marble floors, the chandeliers, the staring faces. Karen Mitchell's smirk had faded, replaced by a flicker of unease, but she held her ground, arms crossed, ready to dismiss Sarah once more. The security guard hovered, uncertain, his presence less a threat now, more a question. Customers exchanged glances, some curious, others uncomfortable, as if sensing a shift they couldn't name. Sarah's hands rested on her tattered bag, her notebook inside a silent anchor, her eyes steady with a purpose no one yet understood. Then the bank door swung open, a gust of cool air cutting through the tension. A man stepped in, his presence commanding without effort. He was in his 60s, silver hair framing a face lined with experience, his suit understated but sharp. David Reynolds, president of the National Community Foundation, a name known in circles of giving, not wealth. His eyes scanned the room, searching, until they landed on Sarah. His face softened, a smile breaking through, warm and urgent. "Sarah Thompson," he called, his voice clear, carrying across the lobby. "Thank God you're here. We've been looking for you." The room stirred, heads turning, whispers rising like a tide. Karen froze, her arms dropping, her confidence cracking. Sarah blinked, surprise flickering in her eyes, but she didn't move, her composure a shield. David crossed the marble floor, his steps purposeful, ignoring the stairs, the tellers, the guard. He reached Sarah, his hand extended, not in pity, but in respect. "The shelter project needs your signature today," he said, his tone a mix of relief and admiration. "Without you, none of this happens." Karen's face paled, her mouth opening, but no words came. David turned to the crowd, his voice steady, commanding attention. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Sarah, "has raised millions for people most of us pass by without a glance. Haven House, her charity, it's not just a name. It's homes, meals, hope for families who've lost everything. That check she brought, it's opening a new shelter, one that'll save hundreds of lives." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, landing on Karen. "And this bank? It stands because of her." A murmur rippled through the lobby, shock giving way to something softer, something like awe. David pulled a tablet from his briefcase, its screen glowing with articles, photos of shelters, families smiling, all tied to Haven House. Sarah's name was there, not in headlines but in fine print, a quiet force behind every brick laid, every life lifted. He held it up, the evidence undeniable. "She's been doing this for years," he said, his voice rising with pride. "Never for fame, never for herself. And that check? It's as real as her heart." Sarah stood still, her face a mix of humility and resolve. She hadn't asked for this moment, hadn't wanted it, but it was here, and she met it with the same strength that had carried her through years of unseen work. The customers who'd whispered now leaned forward, their smirks gone, replaced by furrowed brows, nods, a few clasped hands. The woman with pearls touched her necklace, her eyes damp. The man in the blazer looked down, his face tight with regret. The younger teller, who'd followed Karen's lead, stared at Sarah, her hands trembling slightly, as if seeing her for the first time. Karen tried to speak, her voice a stammer. I didn't know," she said, but the words fell flat, drowned by the truth filling the room. David ignored her, turning back to Sarah. "You've done more than most could dream," he said, softer now, meant for her alone. "That shelter, it's because of you. We need you to sign the final papers, make it real." He handed her a pen, his smile warm, a partner in her mission, not a savior. Sarah took the pen, her fingers brushing the notebook in her bag, its pages a map of her journey. She nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "Let's do it," she said, and the simplicity of her words carried a weight that silenced the last of the whispers. The guard stepped back, his posture softening, no longer a barrier but a witness. The clock on the wall ticked, its rhythm now a heartbeat, not a countdown. The lobby felt different, the air lighter, as if Sarah's truth had cracked open something rigid in its walls. Customers began to clap, tentative at first, then stronger, a wave of respect rolling through the room. A woman in a gray coat wiped her eyes, another nodded to her friend, their voices low but warm. "She's incredible, how did we not see it?" Sarah didn't smile, didn't bask. She stood, pen in hand, her focus on the shelter, the families, the work still ahead. Karen watched, her face a mask of disbelief, her authority crumbling under the weight of what she'd missed. She'd seen only a coat, a pair of shoes, a woman who didn't belong. Now, the room saw Sarah for who she was, and Karen's mistake was laid bare. The tide had turned, not with shouts or vengeance, but with a truth too big to ignore. Sarah's bag, once a target of scorn, was now a symbol. Its patches a story of giving, not lack. The bank, for all its marble and money, was hers in that moment, and everyone knew it. The lobby of Oak Ridge Bank buzzed with a new energy, Sarah Thompson's truth still rippling through the air. David Reynolds stood beside her, his tablet glowing with stories of her charity, Haven House, a beacon of hope for the forgotten. The crowd's whispers had turned to murmurs of respect, eyes now seeing Sarah not as a woman in a faded coat, but as a force who'd built homes from dreams. Karen Mitchell, the head teller, stood across the room, her face pale, her hands clenched, the authority she'd wielded moments ago slipping through her fingers like sand. Sarah held the pen David had given her, her focus on the shelter papers, but the weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. She felt the stares, not cold now, but warm, curious, some even apologetic. The man in the blazer who'd smirked earlier now nodded slightly, his face softened. The woman with pearls wiped her eyes, her necklace forgotten. Sarah didn't meet their gazes. Her heart was with the families waiting for that shelter, the ones who'd trusted her to carry this through. But Karen's silence was loud, a storm gathering in her rigid posture. David broke the quiet, his voice calm but firm. He turned to Karen, his eyes narrowing. "I'd like to speak to your manager," he said, pulling out his phone. "This isn't just about a check. It's about how you treated someone who deserved better." Karen's mouth opened, a protest forming, but it died as David dialed, his call on speaker for all to hear. The regional manager's voice crackled through, clipped and professional. "What's going on, Mr. Reynolds?" David didn't hesitate. He recounted Sarah's ordeal, the check, the corner, the insults, his words measured but heavy. "This bank has a problem," he said, "and it starts with her." Karen stepped forward, her voice shaking. "I didn't know who she was," she said, her eyes darting to Sarah, then away. "I was following protocol. It's my job to be careful." But the excuse fell flat, swallowed by the truth David had laid bare. The manager's voice cut through. "We'll review everything, but this sounds serious, Miss Mitchell. Stay where you are." Karen's face crumpled, her hands twisting together, her flawless bun loosening slightly, a crack in her polished armor. The crowd watched, some leaning closer, others standing still, as if witnessing a reckoning long overdue. Sarah remained quiet, her pen moving across the papers, signing the shelter's future into existence. She didn't look at Karen, didn't need to. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the work, the promise she'd made to those who had nothing. But David wasn't done. He tapped his tablet, pulling up records, his voice steady. "I've checked your bank's transactions," he said, addressing Karen directly. "You've been prioritizing certain clients, haven't you? Deposits pushed through for favors, others delayed or denied. It's not just Sarah. It's a pattern." A gasp rose from the younger teller who'd followed Karen's lead earlier. Her face flushed, her eyes wide, as if seeing her mentor unravel. The manager's voice returned, sharper now. "That's enough, Miss Mitchell. You're suspended, effective immediately. We'll conduct a full audit. If this is true, you're done." Karen's breath hitched, her hands falling limp. The security guard who'd loomed over Sarah before now moved toward Karen, his expression neutral. "Let's go," he said, his voice low, guiding her toward the back office. Her heels clicked faintly, each step a retreat from the stage she'd once ruled. The lobby exhaled, the tension breaking like a wave. Customers murmured, some shaking their heads, others nodding in approval. Sarah finished signing, handing the papers to David with a small nod. He smiled, his voice soft. "You didn't have to endure this," he said, "but you did, and it's going to change things." Sarah's eyes met his, steady, unshaken. "I don't want her ruined," she said, her voice clear, carrying across the room. "I want this bank to do better, for everyone who walks through those doors." Her words landed softly, but they carried weight, a call to something bigger than one woman's mistake. The man in the suit clapped once, then again, others joining, a slow ripple of agreement. The woman with pearls stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry," she said to Sarah. "I should have said something." Sarah nodded, her face gentle, no trace of bitterness. "It's okay," she said. "Just see people for who they are, not what they wear." Karen's absence left a void, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with Sarah's quiet strength, her refusal to let cruelty define her. The guard returned, alone, his posture relaxed, as if he too felt the shift. David tucked his tablet away, turning to Sarah. "The shelter's funded," he said, "because of you." Sarah's lips curved, not a smile of triumph, but of peace. She'd done what she came to do, and more. The bank, with all its marble and money, was different now, and everyone felt it. Sarah Thompson stepped away from the counter of Oak Ridge Bank, her tattered bag lighter now, not from what she'd carried in, but from what she'd left behind. The check for $100,000 was processed, the shelter funded, her promise kept. The lobby, once a cage of whispers and scorn, felt different, softer, as if her truth had warmed its cold marble walls. David Reynolds stood nearby, his smile one of gratitude, not victory. The crowd lingered, some still clapping, others watching Sarah with eyes that saw her now, not her coat, not her shoes, but the woman who'd changed the room. Karen Mitchell was gone, her absence a quiet lesson in what happens when judgment overshadows truth. The security guard returned to his post, his face thoughtful, no longer a shadow over Sarah's path. The younger teller, who'd followed Karen's lead, approached Sarah hesitantly, her voice low. "I'm sorry," she said, her hands twisting. "I didn't know." Sarah met her gaze, her eyes gentle, forgiving. "You know now," she said, "that's what matters." The teller nodded, tears brimming, as if Sarah's words had unlocked something inside her. The bank's hum resumed, but it wasn't the same. Customers moved slower, their glances kinder, their voices softer. The man in the blazer, who judged Sarah silently, stopped to shake her hand, his words halting. "You're doing good work," he said. "I'll be donating to your charity." The woman with pearls wrote a check on the spot, her face flushed with purpose. "I want to help," she said. Sarah thanked them, her voice steady, but her heart was elsewhere, with the families who'd sleep under a roof because of today. Weeks passed, and Sarah's story grew beyond the bank's walls. She stood at a community center one evening, the shelter's grand opening alive with laughter and light. Families she'd helped filled the room, their faces bright with gratitude, their children chasing balloons across a polished floor. Sarah wore her faded coat, the same one she'd worn that day, not out of necessity but choice. It was part of her, a reminder of where she'd been, what she'd overcome. She took the microphone, her voice calm, carrying the weight of her journey. "I learned something in that bank," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "A worn coat doesn't hide who you are. It shows what you've chosen to carry. I chose to carry hope, not for myself, but for others." The room stilled, every word sinking deep. "We all judge sometimes," she continued. "It's human. But what makes us better is seeing past the surface, finding the heart underneath. That's where change starts, not with money, not with power, but with a choice to be kind." Her daughter Emily stood in the front row, her smile wide, her sketchbook filled with drawings of the shelter now real before her eyes. Sarah looked at her, her voice softening. "I did this for you," she said, "for everyone who believes tomorrow can be better." The crowd clapped, not with the hesitation of the bank, but with a warmth that filled the space, a promise of more to come. Sarah stepped down, handing the microphone to a family who'd found a home through Haven House, their gratitude a story of its own. The bank changed too. The regional manager kept his word, launching training to ensure no one faced what Sarah had. Tellers learned to see customers, not close, to ask questions, not assume. Oak Ridge Bank began partnering with local charities, a donation to Haven House its first step. The younger teller, inspired by Sarah, volunteered at the shelter, her hands sorting clothes, her heart learning what her eyes had missed. The community noticed, stories spreading of a woman who'd walked into a bank and left it better, not with anger, but with grace. Sarah didn't seek the spotlight. She returned to her work, her notebook filling with new names, new dreams, but her story lingered, a quiet challenge to those who heard it. For the people in that bank, for the families in the shelter, for anyone who'd ever felt unseen, Sarah was proof that worth isn't in what you wear or what you own, it's in what you give, what you build, what you leave behind. Life, she'd learned, was a series of choices. At 35, she'd chosen to lift others, to wear her struggles like a badge, not a burden. For those watching, her story whispered a truth, one that spoke to every heart over 50, every soul who'd seen time carve its lessons deep. You're never too old to change the world. One act of kindness, one moment of courage can ripple forever. Sarah walked through the shelter, her coat catching the light, her steps steady. She didn't need a new one, she'd woven her own, and it was enough.